Welcome back. Horror films based on horror novels is well established. Clive Barker and Stephen King arguably got their name due to film adaptations of their work. So it surprises me that Richard Matheson doesn't get anywhere near the same kind of recognition, because there's some truly groundbreaking work there. In all, Matheson wrote 16 episodes of the Twilight Zone TV series. All are interesting in their own way, but one of those 16 episodes became the most well-known Twilight Zone episode of all time. Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. Everyone is familiar with this episode because it has been parodied and remade to death. The original episode stars William Shatner as a man who has become convinced a gremlin is on the wing of an airplane looking to crash it. This episode was so popular it was remade for the 1983 Twilight Zone movie, starring John Lithgow in the lead role of the beleaguered man. And of course, the parodies are numerous and well known, The Simpsons being a prime example, and then bringing it all back full circle with Third Rock from the Sun.
So, how was your trip, sir?
Horrifying at first. I looked out the window, and I saw something on the wing of the plane. The same thing happened to me.
And that is just one of his writing credits. For films, we have I Am Legend, which became the Charlton Heston cult classic The Omega Man, and of course the Will Smith film of the same name. His short story Jewel, which he also adapted the screenplay for, became the directorial debut for Steven Spielberg. What Dreams May Come, a novel about the afterlife, became the sometimes horrific, sometimes beautiful Robin Williams film of the same name. And this is a great example of Matheson's unique interpretation of the afterlife. Which of course leads me to today's film, A Stir of Echoes. Once again, based on the novel of the same name, is Matheson's attempt at the classic ghost story genre. There are many more TV and movie writing credits, but for the sake of brevity, we'll leave it there and take a look at A Stir of Echoes. The release of A Stir of Echoes was possibly not the best timed, being released the same year as both The Blair Witch Project and The Sixth Sense. It still did very well, making nearly twice its budget, but it might have done a lot better in a year not filled with ghosts. We open on the sound of a young boy singing a hard-to-make-out tune, and then that same boy talks to his imaginary friend, while being watched over by his father, played by Kevin Bacon. The kid wants to ask his friend an important question, before being dried off by his father, and while his father leaves to get clothes, the kid checks the coast is clear, and then asks,
"Does it hurt to be dead?"
I love that because we're all familiar with those creepy things kids said lists on the internet, so it just plays into that, makes it believable, but it also sets up this ghost story. Downstairs, the boy's father, Tom, is informed about his wife's surprise pregnancy by her sister, Lisa. No test has been done, but Lisa is clairvoyant. I know, just go with it for now. And it's clear Tom isn't pleased when asked to respond.
Bummer.
Yeah, that's really not what he should say. Tom tries to act happy, lamenting the fact he'll have to give up his band, and we learn of their issues with money. Tom having to do overtime so his wife Maggie can take time off for the baby. And we also learn the big driving force of Tom's character, because he says he didn't think he would be so ordinary. And at night, Tom switches his son's nightlight and monitor on, and when he leaves, the son wakes up to tell an unseen entity. The film overemphasizes Tom's son Jake quite a bit. In the book, he's barely even a character. It's about Tom and his experiences first and foremost. I feel like the film wanted to lean into the psychic child trope quite a bit. Don't get me wrong, the book still has that, but the film went in hard on it. Tom, Maggie and Lisa have gone to a neighbour's, Frank, for a party, and we learn about the important characters. Frank, obviously, who's obsessed with community and keeping a nice neighbourhood. Frank is also played by Kevin Dunn, who's one of those incredibly prolific actors who doesn't get a lot of the limelight. Chances are you've seen him from somewhere, but couldn't quite place his name. We also see Harry and learn he's the landlord to Tom and Maggie, which seems insignificant but will be important later. And yes, it might seem irresponsible for Tom and Maggie to leave their child alone in their house, but this film was released in '99, long before that kind of thing became widespread news. Also, it emphasises how nice and friendly the neighbourhood seems to be. Nothing bad could possibly ever happen here. Tom's still keeping an eye on Jake through a baby monitor, so it's not completely irresponsible. And later, once the party has died down and only a few people are left, talk turns to hypnosis, Lisa's speciality, and she makes a convincing case.
Really? Yeah. Then how could they have a scalpel stuck into their throat without even bleeding or without even making a sound?
Now, although she's talking about a fictional event, people have indeed been operated on under hypnosis, which sounds amazing, and the people who talk about it are quick to say it's possible. Conveniently missing out the part where the patient was given lidocaine and bupivacaine to numb the area. I'm not here to say that hypnosis is complete nonsense. I'm a big fan of Darren Brown and he does amazing things. All I'm saying is that it's not some kind of magical panacea. Everyone is quick to call it nonsense, including Tom, but Lisa says something that hits close to the bone.
Just because you kicked around the same 6 blocks for your whole life doesn't mean that there isn't a whole larger world out there.
You can really see how his face drops, that cut deep. Once again, hitting that thinking he's ordinary nerve. And this feeling of inferiority is what drives Tom to volunteer to be hypnotized, willing to do exactly what's asked of him even though he doubts it will work, uttering the famous last words.
What's the worst that can happen?
And that is so much better than it is in the book. There, Tom volunteers and then just pisses about for 2 pages before they get to the point. So at least the film removes that. The hypnosis session begins and it's almost exactly like it's described in the book. Tom is told to imagine an empty movie theatre as the scene morphs around him. It turns what could have been a dull scene into something quite creepy. He's also told that everything is painted black, as paint oozes down the walls and over the seats, until everything is pitch black. It's a really nice, creepy interpretation of how the imagination works. It also gives gravitas to the whole event, and although I never had it done to me, I am told this is fairly accurate to how a hypnosis session would unfold. The session continues, and Tom is told there are blurry letters on the screen, which he slowly drifts towards, until the words come into view. The screen says sleep, as Tom is taken under. And like I said, this is supposedly accurate to real hypnosis, so the film implemented a failsafe, just in case a few susceptible people in the audience were rendered unconscious. As a booming noise is used just to make sure everyone in the audience is wide awake and back in the room, and Tom sees blurry images of a person waving, and then a quick horrific image of a girl covered in plastic. When Tom wakes up with a start, everyone's laughing at what just happened, but Tom isn't ordinary anymore, as Lisa congratulates him on being one of the lucky 8%. Which seems to be one of those myth numbers that films use a lot, similar to the whole humans use 10% of their brains thing. There's no actual basis in reality, it just sounds intelligent and authoritative. Tom is confused and wants to know what happened, and Lisa explains that she stuck a pin in his hand and told him to bleed only on one side, which of course he did. She also got him to remember long-forgotten bullies from his childhood. In the book as well, Tom is given a command to place his shoe in the freezer, which doesn't happen in the film, possibly because they wanted to avoid the Vegas hypnosis stereotype. And while Tom recovers, we also get to see a tattoo on his arm. I love this little detail because it shows the filmmaker's ability to improvise for a nice little bit of characterization. Tom has a heart tattoo with T and M on the inside on his arm, obviously for Tom and Maggie, but the clever part is that Maggie has the same tattoo, but it's Catherine Erb's real tattoo, the T and M standing for her husband Terry and her daughter Maeve. Tom and Maggie leave soon after that, but in bed, Tom is having trouble sleeping. And when he finally manages to sleep, visions of the hypnosis come back to him, as we see him drift towards the cinema screen, and then a safety pin going through a hand. Which isn't an effect, by the way. That's genuinely someone sticking a safety pin through the hand of a stuntman who was paid specifically for that scene. Tom wakes up again, and then has a bizarrely sinisterly scored sex scene with his wife. There is a reason though, as during, Tom keeps having horrific visions, firstly of a tooth being knocked out and then a fingernail being torn off, which causes him to freak out a little bit, telling Maggie it felt like he was being attacked. And in the bathroom, Tom takes some pills and starts to bleed from the mouth, finding one of his teeth dislodged, pulling it out. I like the practical effects in this scene, they are really good, because it does look like Tom pulls a tooth out, but there is a small problem with it. You can see that the tooth is just a flat piece, kind of like a veneer, attached to the front of his teeth, which magically becomes a whole tooth when it falls into the sink. It's a minor thing, and it's something you might not even notice. It's just, unfortunately, I do. Tom's tooth miraculously repairs itself, making him wonder if it even happened, checking to make sure. And downstairs, it's clear something is happening to him, as he's incredibly thirsty while getting visions of the girl from earlier. And on the couch, Tom switches on the TV, and that's when she appears. The first time Tom sees the ghost in the book, it's far less shocking, but for a film, they'd naturally hit that a bit harder. But what's interesting is that if you listen, the ghost asks Tom if he can hear her. But the interesting part about that is that the TV was on static. So, at the risk of invoking the horror of the white noise films, it's possible that Tom could hear her because her voice was coming through that static. It nicely incorporates the usual ghost phenomena into this fictional world, and unlike white noise, doesn't claim it's real. Tom goes back to bed and finds Jake waiting for him at the top of the stairs, who says yet more creepy things, like "you're awake and don't be afraid." In the morning, Tom tells Maggie what happened, trying to figure out who the girl was, with Maggie getting jealous.
Did you fuck her?
You gotta be kidding.
Which is kind of odd, because although Jennifer Morrison was 20 at the time, her character is supposed to be 17 years old. It feels like this line would make more sense if the character was described as 30 years old, as she is in the book. It just feels like this line was written in a different draft of the script. Later, Tom calls Lisa to try and get some answers. He asks her if she had left any kind of post-hypnotic suggestion, which her exact words were,
I just said that. After you wake up, your mind will be completely open, like an open door.
So the reason this is all happening is pretty self-explanatory. Although, I would say I do prefer the book version here. Because in the book, Lisa, or Phil as he's known, tells Tom that his mind is free. It's a subtle difference, but to me, the book version sounds like it's Tom's natural ability being unlocked, rather than something he was given. Back home, Maggie is trying to find a babysitter for Jake, and he is told by his imaginary friend, which should be clear by now is a ghost, that they should call Debbie. And because Maggie is distracted, she doesn't notice when Jake says,
Samantha told me.
I like how these little moments go unnoticed. It shows how supernatural things are still happening. They only now are being highlighted. And later that night, Debbie shows up to babysit for Jake, but when Tom answers the door, his vision goes red. Maggie tells her everything she needs to know, but Tom is acting weird, not sure what to make of his vision. And this is a rather overt example of the film's theme of red, but we'll get into why a bit later. And while walking to a football game, Tom can't shake the feeling that something is wrong, as he continues to see red all around him. Back at the house, Debbie is monitoring Jake, and it's a nice touch that she's reading a Richard Matheson novel, The Shrinking Man, which was also made into a film, The Incredible Shrinking Man. Debbie is able to hear Jake breathing on the monitor, but she's concerned when he suddenly stops. However, Jake starts talking to his friend, startling her, but now she's concerned there's someone in Jake's room, and as she goes to look, Tom starts freaking out, recognizing something's wrong. I like this representation of Tom's abilities, showing that it's not as easy as it sounds. It all comes down to Tom's feelings and interpretations of the incredibly vague things he's seeing. Also, it works great as a setup for later when Tom just doesn't understand and misinterprets what's being shown to him. Debbie asks Jake who he's been talking to, and he mentions a Samantha. Debbie wants to know where he's been talking to her, not believing him, and only at the very last minute does Tom understand what's being shown to him, and he can sense Debbie taking his son away, running back to the house. Tom gets home finding them both gone, and he has no idea where to go, but he finds the red lights guiding him in the right direction, reaching a train station, finding Jake and the babysitter, managing to take him off of her. Cops soon show up to help, but it turns out she wasn't taking their son away. She was taking him to her mother, who works at the train station, because Samantha, who disappeared, was her sister. It's pretty clear that was a bad thing to do, and you could argue that she wasn't thinking straight, but I do have to point out the irony of her kidnapping someone else's child while investigating her missing sister. The situation is explained and Debbie shows a picture of Samantha. Tom recognizes her as the ghost he saw. Tom agrees to not file charges, mainly because he's finally got some answers. He asks Maggie why she hired Debbie, and that's when she remembers what Jake said. Back home, they try talking to Jake, but he seems pretty disinterested, and after a while, something strange happens.
Can you remember any of the things that
Don't ask the boy any more questions.
Talk to me.
Whoa, puberty hit hard and fast. Now, that was weird, but what's weird is that it never happens again. The ghost has a direct line to the people she's trying to talk to, but from now on will only use very vague and in some cases life-threatening methods to get her intentions across. After Jake uses the voice, Tom wants him to do it again, but he has no memory of it, getting Tom quite angry and agitated, shouting at Jake because nothing is happening. Maggie shouts at him to stop, and eventually Tom does, realizing that he was out of line, leading to him spending all night on the couch trying to make the ghost appear again. Can we just go back to the kidnapping for a second? Because remember in the book, Tom's son is barely a character and a much younger child, which would have made his kidnapping far more believable. Because Jake was pretty vocal about not being taken anywhere, how did these cops, and pretty much anyone, miss a child loudly protesting? Anyway, moving on, the neighbourhood is having a big party, which there seems to be a hell of a lot of those kind of things. What is this, the third time there's been a big get-together? Maggie and Lisa are talking, and Maggie is upset how this is affecting Tom and her son. And at the same time, Tom starts asking about Samantha. Nobody knows much, just that she disappeared 6 months prior. And Frank shows up talking about his son's achievements, claiming he doesn't know much about Samantha either. But this moment will be significant for later. Back at home, Tom wakes up on the couch having to look for one of his boots, which is under the furniture. He finds a note from Maggie saying she's out with Jake, and then things get a little strange, as Frank is downstairs with an ominous warning.
"I'm gonna kill you, Tommy. You and Maggie both."
And despite being quite an alarming thing to say, Tom doesn't know what to make of it. Frank just sits on the front step of the house silently, so Tom decides to see if his wife is home and get to the bottom of things. Tom walks down the street feeling strange, but everything seems fine. He gets to Frank's house being invited in by his son, and he's not acting any more normal, showing Tom he's got one of his father's guns, freaking Tom out by pointing it at him, and then suddenly shooting himself in the chest and smearing himself in his own blood. Another not-so-subtle reference to the theme of Red, as Tom suddenly wakes up. Clearly that was some form of premonition, but I like how vague it all was, with a few details that won't be realised for quite some time. Also, perhaps Tom would have had the dream anyway, but his new, opened mind allowed him to remember it and not just feel a vague sense of déjà vu. Perhaps that's all what déjà vu is. So yeah, the day plays out just like Tom's dream. He finds the boot under the furniture and the note from Maggie on the mirror. However, there's no Frank this time round. And even though he doesn't have a reason to go, Tom still walks to his house. And as things continue to play out, like his dream, the realization hits him running to Frank's house just as he hears a gunshot. Tom breaks a window and tries to help Frank's son, who did indeed shoot himself. It's possible that with Tom's help, an ambulance was called just in time. It nicely illustrates how it's not a superpower, it's just a slight advantage. Also, I feel like Tom would get better at preventing these sorts of incidents once he got used to trusting the visions and his instincts. Maggie takes Jake for a walk and away from the drama. Unfortunately, they end up at a graveyard. Jake doesn't seem put off, even watching a funeral. A police officer in attendance notices Jake, and he follows them both, which is a bit creepy to say the least. The cop talks with Maggie, saying he recognizes her son's ability, referring to it as X-ray. He deduces that Jake's father also has this ability, telling Maggie to get Tom to visit him later. He then says goodbye, somehow knowing Jake's name, and Jake somehow knowing his name is Neil. Now, I mentioned Stephen King at the start of this video because this film does hit quite a few of the same story beats as The Shining. A child with psychic abilities, a father driven crazy by ghosts, and now Neil is like Dick Halloran, a sort of mentor-like figure. It's only surface level, and the film doesn't do much else like The Shining, but it's interesting to note the similarities. And speaking of being driven crazy, Tom is obsessed with playing a particular song that he can't quite get right. Jake helps him find the right note, but Tom still can't quite place the song. Jake and Tom are so distracted they don't even notice Maggie leaving. She says she's going to the movies, but taking a knife with her for protection, it's clear she's going to speak with Neil. In an unfamiliar street, Maggie finds a place called the Third Eye, and is directed round the back when asked to speak with Neil. Maggie finds the door, and knocking, she's not exactly greeted warmly. It's a stark contrast to the previous conversation, as Neil just tells her to leave, as the other people he's with are paranoid and aggressive. It's an interesting glimpse into a possible future for Tom and even Jake. Perhaps it's inevitable, but possibly if they can solve this mystery, it can be averted. Maggie insists on staying and getting answers, and Neil reluctantly gives her the cliff notes. Tom's ability is like a faulty flashlight in a dark tunnel, only getting a brief glimpse of something. He also warns that their ghost has asked Tom to do something, and she'll get more and more angry until he does it. And back home, we immediately see the consequences of this. As Maggie takes a bath, the ghost appears and draws the heat from the water, turning cold instantly. And with Jake, Samantha looking particularly angry, changes his TV to the original Night of the Living Dead. Maggie tells Tom about the lack of heat, wanting him to check the boiler in the basement. However, he's too distracted trying to find the song from his mind. What's happening here is actually a lot more clever than just a ghost messing with people, because she first makes them think the boiler is broken, driving Tom into the basement. However, Maggie goes instead because Tom is too distracted. So when Maggie goes down into the basement, finding the boiler still working, Samantha breaks the light bulb, leading to her hitting her head. Which should mean, again, Tom would have to go into the basement. The ghost is very deliberately driving Tom to the exact location he needs to be in. But because he's too distracted, he can't differentiate between the important information and the unnecessary stuff. So in a way, Neil was right when he said,
Maybe he wasn't listening.
But it might be more accurate to say that Tom doesn't know how to listen just yet. Having said that though, the ghost does just mess with Jake for seemingly no reason, continuing to change his TV channel, until he's forced to pull the plug, leading to the best reaction from this kid. Just one of the best, nope, I'm out of here kind of reactions I've seen in a while. And while Tom tries to find the song, it seems Samantha has decided to be more direct, as he gets a vision of the house cold and unfurnished before it was completed, and Samantha appears doing that creepy walk ghosts like to do. That effect, achieved by having the actress walk backwards and then just playing it forwards, is subtle, but it gives just enough of that uncanny valley feeling to creep you out a bit. Samantha reaches out for Tom, doing something to his hand, and that ghostly infection crawls up to his body. It's clear that what's happening is damaging to Tom, and Maggie snaps him out of it just in time. But again, I do believe, although that it looks like the ghost was harming Tom, it was more of an unintended side effect. But Tom has had enough and goes to Lisa's place, immediately wanting her to hypnotize him again, to get rid of the ability. It doesn't help that she's high as hell currently, but she does agree to do the hypnosis. Once again, Tom goes back to the movie theatre, and it was creepy before, but now he's not alone. Tom drifts closer to the blurry words on the screen. The whole process is quickly hijacked by Samantha, as she starts clawing at Tom, and the words on the screen become the simple instruction, dig. I did say she was going to be more direct in her approach. You can't get more direct than that, really. Tom wastes no time, as the next day Maggie comes home to find the backyard looking like the Somme. Remember that bit I mentioned about the basement? Yeah, Tom tells Maggie what he's been instructed to do, but he's still not quite understanding. It should be noted that Kevin Bacon suffered a pulled muscle in his neck for this scene. However, the lighter prop pickaxe didn't look convincing enough, so he had to use the real one. Kevin Bacon literally suffering for his craft right there. Tom gets frustrated at Maggie's questions and she wants to call the police. Not as if that would help though. And Tom brings it all back to the beginning, saying that he won't stop because this is the most important thing he's done in his ordinary life, ranting and raving about how he needs to do this instead of sitting on the couch till one day up and dying. Maggie quite rightfully tells him that his stupid ordinary life is their life too, so he is being a bit of a dick. And inside, Tom does see that, trying to apologise with a cool, refreshing glass of Minute Maid orange juice. Tom has been unnaturally thirsty throughout the film, and it's never effectively explained why. I do have my theories, but I'll get into that later. I just wanted to talk about the strange product placement of Minute Maid orange juice. Normally, I wouldn't mention it, but it's just so horribly blatant. Don't believe me? It's pretty blatant. So anyway, Tom tries apologising, and Maggie is still mad, but that's all forgiven when Maggie tells Tom her grandmother's going back into hospital, but he already knows that she passed away, and then Maggie gets the call to confirm it. I like this small premonition from Tom, because it shows how he's gotten used to the ability where small things are second nature now. Maggie prepares to leave to attend the funeral, and Tom pisses Maggie off again by saying he should stay home while she goes. So Maggie and Jake leave for the funeral, with Tom left to his own devices. And Tom continues to dig up the yard, but when he tries to use the hose, there's no water. And for any aspiring actors out there, that is a brilliant example of why you should stay in character as much as possible while on set.
Fucking water.
Because the bucket smashing the window was completely unintentional. But because Kevin Bacon stayed in character and it was such a good character moment, it remained in the film. I have to wonder if the water going off was done by Ghost Samantha, because it's finally gotten Tom into the basement. He changes the light bulb, and then something makes him stop and consider the concrete floor, as he starts bashing away at it with his pickaxe. Thankfully, Tom isn't that stubborn and recognises he needs something a bit more heavy duty, getting a jackhammer, which by the sounds of it, he enjoys quite a bit. When Tom calls Maggie, he says he's done with the digging and everything is back to normal now, so Maggie suggests he drive up to be with the family. Tom makes excuses, but Maggie insists, saying she'll pick him up soon, with the rather comical reveal that Tom isn't done digging and in fact is in the process of destroying the house. Maggie wants to take Jake with her, but he doesn't want to, saying he's scared of the feathers. So Maggie agrees to leave him with Lisa. But before she goes, Jake makes sure she takes her handbag with her. These are all nice little setups for later. And back in the basement with Tom, after destroying the garden, destroying the interior of the house, and potentially severely weakening the foundations, all that Tom had to do was... I do find it darkly comical that Tom goes through all of this stuff, and at the end, all he really needed to do was one small tap on a bunch of rocks. In this case, though, it isn't really his fault, because there's no way he could have known that's where he needed to dig, even if he had gotten into the basement sooner. Tom pulls the bricks away and he finds a load of plastic, and cutting it away, Tom finds an orange coat and the corpse of Samantha underneath it. Samantha disappeared 6 months before the events of the film. Now, although her body looks more akin to something found in an Egyptian tomb, it is fairly accurate, especially considering the plastic she was wrapped in, which would have helped the mummification process. Also, remember that Tom has been incredibly thirsty the entire film. That possibly could convey that her body was in a particularly dry environment, leading to this artificial mummification. Tom grabs the body's hand, and similar to how she tried to affect Tom earlier, this time he's transported into Samantha's body, as he relives her last moments. Samantha is called over by Harry's son, and gets her to follow him into the house by promising a surprise. One thing that's not effectively conveyed in the film is that Samantha is supposed to have the mind of a child. That would explain why she is so naive and trusting of people she really shouldn't be. Things turn nasty quickly as one of the boys starts forcing himself onto Samantha. She tries to run, but is pushed over, leading to her losing a tooth. As things get more violent, and to muffle her screams, the radio is turned on, explaining all the references to Red because the song is Paint It Black. Not the Rolling Stones version though, they couldn't afford it. And this is the song that Tom has been trying to figure out this entire time, and it's clear why it kept coming back to him. It's the last thing Samantha heard. And possibly the hypnosis scene was foreshadowing to this, as Lisa told Tom the theatre was painted black. And if you're not familiar with Paint It Black, it's a song about the extreme grief suffered after the sudden unexpected loss of a loved one. So it's quite sadly appropriate. Samantha continues to struggle, managing to pull some hair off of her attacker, and that's when one of the boys covers her in a plastic sheet, leading to her being suffocated to death. Which confirms what I was saying, how Tom wouldn't be able to breathe when he had visions, as it was an unintended side effect. After the vision, Tom recovers, leaving the basement, and Harry's son, probably wondering what was going on, sees the body through the window, quickly running off. Tom immediately goes over to Frank's to be the first to tell him of what he's found, and I guess this would explain why his son shot himself now. Tom takes Frank to see the body and explains that he's gonna have to call the cops. Frank acts surprised at Tom's find. He thinks Tom doesn't have any proof that his son and Harry's son was involved. But when Tom points out the hair Samantha has in her hand, that's when the facade falls, as Frank helped the boys hide the body. Things take a turn when Frank reveals he has a gun and shoots at Tom to get out of the basement, and then it sounds like Frank followed his son's actions as another gunshot is heard. Before Tom can react to the second crisis of the evening, another one comes knocking on the door, as Harry's son has obviously told his father what he's found. And of course, there's a subtle air of menace, as Tom sees something in Harry's pocket as he gets inside to see what's going on. Tom tries to pretend he was looking for the water main as it was leaking. He attempts to leave, grabbing his keys, placing them between his fingers as a makeshift weapon. And when Harry tries to go for the gun, Tom attacks, using a lamp. But Tom is knocked down. Fortunately, they're then stopped from killing him when Maggie shows up outside. Can I just say how nice it is to have a ghost movie that doesn't end with bloody demons or evil supernatural crap? When did that change occur? That all ghost films have to have an evil presence now? Outside, Maggie sees the lights of the house go out, immediately getting suspicious, making sure to get the knife out of her handbag, which is why Jake made sure she took it earlier. Maggie gets inside and the lights aren't working, and when she turns a lamp on, Harry attacks her. She uses the knife effectively though, stabbing him in the foot, and that's when Frank appears, not actually dead, to shoot the attackers and save Tom and Maggie. And remember Jake saying he was afraid of the feathers? However, I'm not too sure what the film is trying to say here, because it might seem like the bullet was going to kill Jake, but he wouldn't have been in his bed. He would have arrived with Maggie, so I'm really not too sure about this one. After saving them both, the earlier premonition is finally explained.
We're gonna kill you, Tommy. You and Maggie both.
And while he's with Frank on the doorstep, Tom sees Samantha restored as she walks off free finally, which makes a nice conclusion. However, the film does have a slightly darker ending, as first Tom and Maggie move out of the house, but as they drive away, Jake covers his ears as he starts to hear more and more voices calling to him for help. So yeah, quite the dark end, especially considering the much lighter one just before it. But that was Stir of Echoes. Decent ghost story, decent mystery, decent film all round really. The main thing that makes this film stand out is the psychic and hypnosis stuff. That gives it an added detail that not many ghost stories go into. And the fact that it's not all about scary moments, it's also about this man experiencing things he doesn't understand, and how it develops over time. It does help as well that the mystery is, well, mysterious. Written almost like a whodunit with ghosts. I mentioned Kevin Bacon's acting, and although he's become quite the meme nowadays, this film does show off his prowess. The ensemble is great too, even the kid, who at no point actually came off as annoying or creepy, which is quite the feat. And like I said, it really is so refreshing to find a ghost movie that doesn't devolve into demonic occult crap. That alone makes it stand out, especially nowadays where you can't swing a ghost without hitting a pentagram or upside down cross for the truly hackneyed. Oh, and before we go, I need to mention that, unfortunately, sadly, Stir of Echoes got a sequel. Yes, Stir of Echoes 2, The Homecoming, starring Rob Lowe. It's one of those films that started out as a completely unrelated film, but was then redeveloped as a sequel. And why am I talking about it now? Because I'm not looking at it. Life's too short for crappy, repurposed direct-to-DVD nonsense that misuses the good faith garnered from the first film's reputation to tell a badly written story about racism and the war in Iraq. No, thank you. I have something far better to look at that I am much more eager to get to. Thank you so much for watching. I'd like to give a massive thank you to all my Patreon donators. Their support really does help a lot. And if you would like to contribute to the channel and gain access to the Deusdaecon Reviews Discord server, the link is in the description below. And if you would like to get more content aside from the reviews, please consider checking out the Twitch channel, where I stream live 5 days a week, 9 PM GMT, with subjects ranging from Let's Plays, discussions, and movie watch-along nights. So join me live if you wish to see stunning moments of strategy just like this one. You, trade with me. Oh! That was a mistake! That was a mistake! Holy shit! What? Fuck! The link is in the description, so I'll hopefully see you there. And on YouTube, I'll see you next time.